Yeah, fine.
All right, please
I'm ready.
welcome Dennie Declercq.
Thank you for introducing me, Dylan. And please watch my talk. Maybe I talk about somebody you know. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's in the fifth slide. Okay. Hi all. Welcome to my talk, Autism and Tech. The Build Stuff edition, the Rock and Code edition. So I put some guitars and party emojis and icons on my slides. So because it's Build Stuff for the first time for me. So if I do talks about autism, I want to do that on an accessible way. And accessibility is not only about people with disabilities. It's not only about people with autism. If you do accessibility in a good way, you do it in a way that everybody get help with that. And by just showing what can people expect from the talk. Maybe there are other talks this time slot. Of course, it's a great conference with so many talks together. And just showing what can you expect of this talk in the beginning, the second slide, is a part of accessibility, that you know what you're going to expect today. And you can leave, of course, if there's something more to your field of interest. So I'm going to talk about a bit of explanation about what autism is, a bit of explanation about autism. And of course, the biggest part will be autism and tech, because that's the talk today, and tech. And then, because these are special times, these are weird times with the pandemic, I want to link it to autism in times of the pandemic. And then it's already the end of this talk. Oh my God. So the intro, I'm just starting with saying who I am. So I'm Dennie, and I'm president and developer at DDSoft. And DDSoft is a nonprofit that I found myself. And by the way, this is the first conference ever that DDSoft is sponsoring the partnership. Let's call it a partnership. Very happy, and we also going again international. In the past we start with conference speaking, but our customers then were all from Belgium, and now we are expanding some parts of knowledge for everyone. So we're going to consult into accessibility and autism. More about that on our website and on our banners. So, but we have knowledge in working with people with autism. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and that's the thing that right now I'm most proud that I achieved in my life. Yeah, maybe together with my huge weight loss of 40 kilos. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I was better. They say the MVP. So, and I'm the founder of the hashtag Dreaming is Believing. So I like to use hashtag, and Dreaming is Believing all about my dream that I had to become a world famous conference speaker. At that time, I didn't know it will be going virtual after 3 years of Dreaming is Believing, but I'm still happy to walk the stage. So, and I'm autistic. And that means in my scenario, as a child, I was always different. And when I was 13 years old, I got my autism diagnosis. I went to a school for autistic teenagers, and I had a big interest in IT. I wanted to be a programmer, but unfortunately, the school where I went to discouraged me and my parents to go for university college. Why? Because the level of math in that school was way too low. Between 2008 and 11, I tried some jobs because I didn't have the computer science degree and I had problems with communication. The only job that they offered to me was in a fabric for people with disabilities. And after hours, I was developing in Microsoft technologies for the very first, for my hobby and free time. And the job, I had to do easy manual tasks. And for me, if I cannot think on things, if I have to do just easy work by hand, my brain takes me to everywhere, but definitely not to where I want to be and need to be, and where it's good for me. So I became mentally ill, and I had to go on a sickness benefit. But beside of that, as I said, it's not only about autism and problems. I'm a big tech lover, and I'm very passionate and follow the tech scene from a pretty long time. From the beginning, I was always fanatic pro Microsoft. Later in this talk, I go a link about autism and being fanatic. Yeah, but as I said, and by the way, that is the slide before the last slide of the live demo. These are the live demo. Just the story about an old person with autism itself, how he experienced technology and his life. After the next slide is going to be technical about explanation, but that's the live demo because at the conference you need live demos. And it's a talk without code, so the live demo is just a real insight in the head of an autistic person. So I continue the demo. So always fanatic pro Microsoft, as I said. And I used Windows Mobile on PDAs. Who remembers Windows Mobile? After that, I was one of the early adopters of Windows Phone. Can you all imagine the pain that I have knowing that Windows Phone has died? Okay. I have installed each Windows version since Windows 98, and I worked with each OS. What I mean, it was not on my own device, but I used computers with since Windows 3.1. Why? I missed Windows 1.0? My thoughts on Windows 8. I love the introduction of apps. I saw people around me, to be sure, not tech people, having a lot of struggle with Windows 8. I didn't see why. After all, I love Windows 10. I call it the ease of use of Windows 7 with the possibilities of apps who came with Windows 8. I never been a gamer. I always said games are boring because the game world you live in is already created like the developers want it to be. I want to develop my own thoughts. And by the way, I know in some games you can create a lot yourself, but that was the thoughts that I had. Maybe they are not right, doesn't matter, it were my thoughts. I started coding in Visual Basic 6. I changed to Visual Basic.net, and after that I saw the light, or I saw C#. I love music, and I'm proud that I present at a conference in the rock style. But if I have to choose between a music festival and a software conference, yeah, I choose a software conference. And I made the choice in the past, really. Both conferences, I always compare conferences to festivals. And this talk or this slide or this ID, maybe the slide is a bit rebranded, but this ID is not just before build stuff, made for build stuff. It's an idea long in my head, and you can find it on the internet. But artists perform at music festivals, and speakers present on conferences. For me, in the early years of going to conferences, it was very special that you can talk to the speakers after they talk. So to be sure, I wasn't a speaker yet. You know, artists or rock stars, you cannot talk to them, but as speakers, they are just normal human beings, and I really love that. And maybe, in fact, shouldn't artists be the same? And then you have speakers who are speakers, and also real rock stars, you know? You all know this guy on this picture, as I promised. So the live demo is over. The real insight of let's call it the autistic talk. I talked way too much about myself. I want to give you some theoretical structures about autism. And in the next part about real autism and tech, I can reflect to this theoretical part. And I always learn, if you really want to speak at a conference, software conference, and you really want to learn people, you have to talk about something, nothing to do with code at all, because most of the people know already a lot about code. And if you try to give them something completely brand new, they learn most. So let's give you some theoretical structures about autism. I hope you love it, or you like it at least. Autism is diagnosable as a neurodevelopmental disorder in the DSM-5. And the DSM is an abbreviation of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Autism is also, in most countries, an official disability. What do I mean with the official disability? If you get a diagnosis, you can get benefits, like, by example, a replacement of your loan to live, or some reductions on your bills to pay. Next to that, there's also a common approach of advices to live with as a person with autism yourself, or to handle persons with autism, to get the best quality of life. The focus right now, in these times of 2020, and it started in the early 2000s, is quality of life. The most important thing is that the person with a disability, so not only for autism, but all the disabilities, live as much quality as life as possible. So, and the work use is very dependent on local factors. For example, in Belgium, they group everybody as a person with ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. In other countries, they called it autistic people. There are also abbreviations. Is it the same of Asperger's or not? It's a very local thing. So if you speak at international conferences about autism, I call autism as for everything. But if you need to diagnose, so the brain of a person with autism works different. And there's a set of common approach and advices. And to have to diagnose, there must be a mismatch in communication, executive functioning, and central coherence. And Peter Vermeulen is a Belgian famous authority who added the term context blindness. So, and what's all this term? So let's go deeper into that. Communication is all about getting in contact with somebody, with other people, and with other authorities. Communication is about talking to people, mailing, messaging, chatting. Can I make a joke? Sexting? Yeah, it happens in these times. It works normally in real life conferences. We see what happens. If I shock people online, we see. About getting personal, professional, and passionate or closer relationships. Most of the time, persons with autism talk too much or too little, no in between. Some people with autism talk too much, too little, no in between. Really important. Other thing I can say about people with autism and communication, they have a limited topic of interest. Most of the people with autism have difficulties with eye contact. And that's maybe the only good thing about virtual conferences in the pandemic. You don't have struggles with eye contact anymore. All the times at real life conferences, I feel guilty because I know that my eye contact isn't good. Every disadvantage has also its advantages, of course. The only thing is, you can be too honest. And this can lead into real embarrassing situations for the people who are with you. By example, your coworkers. Executive functioning is everything that you need to execute tasks in your daily living and or your working environment. Examples are planning a time slot in your agenda, planning what you need from the groceries, planning which step you need to do to make a Hello World application, planning how to get with public transportation or with your own car to your work or to a conference, doesn't matter. Planning what to wear at this conference. Planning which sessions you want to see. This is executive functioning. Central coherence is a coherence of situations, persons, things, tasks, and words. Central coherence is about seeing the global picture. How is everything glued together? How are situations linked to each other? The last theory about autism, or one of the really one, there are some additional ones, of course. You have to do some additional stuff in the world. The really base study is about context blindness, so the term of Peter Vermeulen. In short words, people with autism doesn't always understand the context of something. One incentive has one meaning for a person with autism. From other people, one incentive can have different meanings in different scenarios. I try to give you some examples. In the normal world, so yeah, different scenarios. So people with autism can have difficulties. So communication with words is the same. People without autism are using the same word for different meanings in different scenarios. So a concrete example, somebody says, I had a bad day. What is bad? Or, yes, you did a great job today. Some people say, you did a great job, at least in the Dutch language, if you translate it. If you really didn't do well, if you really didn't do a great job, so they call it sarcastic. So it's not always the same. So great talk, great job. It's not always great. Sometimes it can be sarcastic. And especially in the Dutch language, there are a lot of people using sarcastic sentences. So what is great? So if you communicate with a person with autism, don't be sarcastic. Or if you know the person for a longer time and you really know that he really wants to do this. Because working with somebody with autism, there are some common practices, but it's also always a one-to-one coaching. So some advices really won't work and others will work. That's very important. So as I said, there were some extra things like comorbid diagnosis. And to be sure, I find comorbid a very cruel word because morbid I link to dying, but it's the official name for having other disorders next to your autism. This can be extra anxiety, ADHD or ADD, depressions, or extra problems with coping stress. And why do I use the term extra? So, a lot of people with autism has already more stress and anxiety than people without autism. And if I say extra, then they really have an additional, for example, anxiety disorder, or really big stress difficulty, and not only the base autism thing. But for me, for example, anxiety is always really close by. So now we are going to give you some real-world examples about these 4 things. So let's go to this. Cannot cope stress. Most people with autism have difficulties coping stress. Stress and pressure give them bad functioning or even out of functioning. People can get ill due to stress. And some people have communicative explosions if they are too stressed. And some, if they are over their limit, they roll really into a bore or burnout. People with autism most of the time have trouble and difficulties in the field of anxiety. They can be anxious for many reasons, but in autistic thinking, most of the time for things that other people shouldn't be afraid of. Examples, very afraid to get rejected at their job, so lose their job, or get rejected by friends or by their partner. In the next chapter, of course, I'm going to talk about how anxiety can come into place in tech. I had it always, so also I'm going to talk about it a bit later. The average of people with autism are pretty fanatic. If they believe in something, they want everybody to see it like this. Otherwise, if they are against something, you really shouldn't use it. They say it to everyone. Some examples, not tech or half tech, pro Facebook, against Facebook. I really know some people, for example, with autism, really not using Facebook, and even if they need it, they really don't know it. Or another non-tech example, Greta Thunberg and her vision on sustainability. I'm really not going to talk good or bad. I not label it by feeling, but just fanatic. And everybody can say she is really driven into that. You don't have to label this. We're just saying very passionate or fanatic. It's really close to each other. Very passionate, very fanatic. And most of the time, people with autism have different energy levels. And this can be on 2 sides. They can be exhausted very fast in common. So some people with autism really don't have a lot of energy, so are most of the time pretty fast exhausted. But some people have a lot of energy in the beginning of something new, for example, a new technology, but then they lose it very, very fast. Or people get or lose energy from other things. For example, some people really cannot go to a pub or a cafe for their autism because it has too many incentives. So I know people in my network who are saying, lockdown, cafes are closed, pubs are closed. Doesn't matter who goes to pubs. So I'm one of the people with autism. I get energy from going to the pub, so I don't like it that they are closed. But that's different. So finally, you survived the theory about autism. Let's continue the rest of this talk with real tech explanations and how we link the autism theory to technology. And I really did it consciously starting with the autism theory because we are all technology people and technology is science. And we need framework to match this. So I cannot talk, I find this, I shouldn't be a good speaker if I talk about autism scenarios if I can't link it to the structures who are there, to the mental frameworks that they are into the autism knowledge. So let's talk about being fanatic and tech. Some people are a real big Microsoft fan, and some people are a real big Apple fan or an open source fan. If I observe the world, people with autism are most of the time more fanatic than other people. I say most of the time, it's always one-to-one. Or they only use a Mac, or they only use a Windows device. Microsoft is all good and the way to go, or it is evil, or Apple is all the good, or it is evil. But it is not only about software and operating systems. It's also about being pro JavaScript, or pro C# or what else. I see in my surroundings more people without autism taking the best of both worlds together. By example, using a front end in Angular, so a JavaScript framework, and working with the backend in C#. For me, by example, that was always very difficult. I'm a fanatic pro the Microsoft implementation. And on my websites that I made, I never had a good PWA approach or a good front-end technology at ever. No, I'm really happy with Blazor. At this time, I can start learning good front ends. I didn't have the feeling with JavaScript framework. But I know a consultant without autism a lot. For example, making for some customers a PHP site, and from some customers an ASP or an ASP.NET site. For people with autism, it can be more difficult. And of course, it can also be in libraries for so specific parts of a software design system. And anxiety in tech, maybe you can believe how difficult it can be. So you can be afraid to change from stack to another tool stack. You can be afraid to shut a product or a process before starting a new one. Being afraid to be rejected in a forum online, and being afraid to ask a critical question. Being afraid to admit there's something you need help with, because if you don't know everything, you are not an expert, or in fact, you are not a programmer in any way. No. Something people with autism can think is not the truth, of course. Very important. Some things people think things with autism, but it's not obvious true, and you cannot know everything. But I had a period in my life that I had that feeling. I was at a conference and I didn't ask something to a speaker because if you don't know everything, you are not an expert, of course. Of course, it's wrong. It's a thought that people can have. And can you imagine that it can also be trouble with friends or parents in your network? Let's imagine you are afraid to a crash system, such as Windows crash. But you really want everything, the greatest and latest updates, for example, of Windows, and you are on an insider thing, you manage it to become an insider, your system crashed, you panic, and then the close people with you, for example, my parents, who are not technical engineers at all, and then, shoot, why do you install also the latest things? If it's not stable, you shouldn't be afraid, yeah. And then you have to explain everything, and that can be very, very confused. And sometimes as a person with autism, you don't understand yourself anymore. That's also can happen. I had a talk that I delivered at some conferences about Azure, going from infrastructure as a service in Azure to platform as a service. have a complete talk about that, but to be sure, I waited way too long time to do that implementation. I didn't dare. So been there, done that. As I said, the Windows thing, yeah. But I want to add, it's not only about Windows. It can also be with software environments or even NuGet packages. Let's continue to NuGet. At a certain point, I was building Android application in Xamarin Forms. And I updated to new NuGet to the latest and greatest Xamarin Forms version. And I went again, and my app didn't launch again. What happened, and I had to build it for a customer project, so for people with disabilities, with a deprecated device. So you have a lower version of Android, and that build, so that NuGet package was only working on higher versions of Android. It was not a solution for them to buy a new iPhone, a new smartphone, an Android, but it had to work. I really tried to find it by degrading the NuGet patch again, and it worked again. You cannot believe how long it took for me to try to update the NuGet again. And even I heard on the news, on the Microsoft news, on the Microsoft conferences, it's a good news that they are working on that, and it's already before lower Android version, my example of 4.4. I wait again so long to try to update the NuGet. After all, I found how you can update NuGet packages via a specific and separate Git branch, and then I really start playing with Git for the Xamarin updates, and that was fun. The energy, as I said, sometimes people get energy from strange things. I mean, sometimes they get energy from a new technology, but sometimes it takes a lot of energy. So learning each latest and greatest function from some people, autism can take a very long time. And then there are people who started with a new technology very, very not often, so very not a lot. So each 2-3 years, maybe they start new technology, and then they stick to that for years. And this can be a disadvantage. Maybe if you have coworkers or everyone is always using the latest and greatest, and this is sometimes difficult for a person with autism, then you really have to try to work around. So, and then they can be fanatic for it for years, and then yeah, you know. For me, Blazor is now the technology that I really know. It takes a lot of invest in time and energy. But if there will be something new again, I don't know if I can go onto the boat again. And later on, I'm going to talk about C#. Specific code. So different communication, as I said, talking too much or too little, but it can be a struggle at user group events and conferences. So maybe this a bit strange. So we are the virtual times, unfortunately, but in the time of the good times of traveling and real life conferences, maybe people can find people with autism or could find me a weirdo, always talking about my interest. But at the software conference, we are all geeks who are talking about our passion. But sometimes it's difficult. As I said, eye contact can really be a struggle for people with autism, and different non-verbal communication. An example can be really being excited about a speaker, but you can't show the appreciation. Or otherwise, you are excited about a speaker, and you show the appreciation too much, so that you say, "Oh my God, you are stalking me." Forums are difficult if you are fanatic. If you are a limited topic of interest. When I started my tech career, I had the feeling that people at some forums really expected a lot of do-it-yourself knowledge before. So you really need to do a lot of online searching before. They call it Googling. Maybe it's due to my autism, but years ago, when I was in the beginning of my tech journey, it's already years ago, I'm getting old, my friends. I had the feeling that people didn't take me serious because I had difficulties to try to find the great search term. I quote in that. So DMs, as I said, there's a big mismatch between seeing the context of the person at the other side. It can be difficult to see the context. So DMs can be very difficult. You say your thoughts, you don't see how the person on the other side is interpreting that, but other side, if the person give feedback again with a sentence or some sentence, you always, as a person with autism, can misinterpret that. And this can really cause difficulties, miscommunication. You have to work on that. As I said, we're going to talk a bit about C# because I'm a Microsoft MVP and I want to talk about C# coding. Most of the time, person with autism thinks straightforward. What do I mean? If they think their way is the best way to code, sorry, it's their way of the highway. Maybe it's sounds selfish, but it isn't in that way. It's in another way. And I have problems with it if I'm coding together with my friend and my DDSoft team member, Kenny. Sometimes he asks me to work with other patterns. It can be very difficult for me. And I can hold my hand, my leg very stiff and figurative talking, but yeah, I know. But also, as you know, I attend a lot of conferences and watching you in C# x.x, sometimes I still code like in C# 3.5 and C# 9 right now, was released yesterday, or I did it in C# 8. And maybe I still use some pattern from Visual Basic 6 and translate it to C#. It's not a good thing, and I have to work on that, and I'm really, at this time, working on that. But if you link that to the theory of autism, there's a really thing that's well known, difficulties with adopting change. And you can understand that difficulties with adopting change, how difficult it can be to do a code review. If your code works, and it works not only on your device, but also on the other device on the web end, but this may be a deprecated way of coding, you know. And it's also one of the reasons, or the biggest reason, that for me it's very difficult to contribute to open source. And I know I should do it. You shouldn't do, but it will be good to give some, for example, advices on accessible patterns. But it's so difficult. I'm still too afraid to get rejected on my code style. Okay, something completely different, because we are nearly to the end. Colors and IDAs can be different. So, for example, for me, Visual Studio Code in the dark color scheme doesn't work. If I work in the dark color scheme, even in the Windows terminal, for example, I feel myself like a guilty hacker, and I think hacking is bad. But if I change it to a bright ID, I feel myself more released. Otherwise, you have people with autism who change completely the normal Visual Studio to dark, so everything is possible. Day structure, people can have a different day structure most of the time. This can also be linked to autism. So, 5 minutes. Autism in times of a pandemic. Are you ready? Virtual conferences. So, this can be something very strange. Something you want to see it all. You want to speak, but also attend it all. And then you have different time zones. You really have to, you have to really be aware of your limits and borders. But sometimes it's also give energy. Distractions and attentions is difficult. You have to do a lot more work to find your distractions and to keep attended. So structure, you need to do a lot of work. And besides of that, you have your own responsibilities. If you travel to a conference, it doesn't matter as a speaker of an attendee. The conference provides your food, your drinks. You don't have to do groceries. You have to plan it all yourself. If you, for example, know I am attending 3 days build stuff, not only my talk, but I'm going to attend 3 times, I really have to be aware of my fridge, and I have to be aware what I want to eat. Do I need to make fresh food or not? Or because maybe I don't want to miss some talks. And sometimes people really want that you do your work also. Even for my nonprofit now, I have some customers. It's less clear that if you have traveled to the conference. So you need to be aware of your mental health, and you have to be aware of escape actions, anxiety. You have to be aware that you keep your relaxation, some coping for incentives, and the best thing is practice positive thinking. It always helps. Agenda changes, so there's no commute anymore, so searching for free time, and that's a good thing. in the past, I really loved cooking myself, and I completely stopped it for all the conference work and also the DDSoft customers and work. And now I have more time because no commuting, and I started my cooking hobby again. So making some fresh food myself. That's fun. As always, ending positive. But I don't have a lot of time, but I want to give you one thing more. One of the slides of my very first conference talks I gave, and all the people love it. I want to compare autistic logic versus developers logic. I know a lot of people love it. So developers, a boolean is only true or false. Autistic logic, a fact is only true or false. It's good to declare variables. And what type is expected? I know they are var developers. I'm not one of those. As I said, as a person with autism, it's nice that every circumstance is declared. If you program a loop, the exit scenario should be clear. If there's a path to follow, Autis like it clear and clean. Developers logic, I said, it's very structured. It should be very structured. If you look at GitHub, sometimes it should be very structured. Yeah, most of the people with autism are very structured. Thank you.
Thank you.
Q&A maybe is...
That was excellent. So we're just going to give folks a couple of questions. Anybody who's watching on the stream, if you do have any questions for Dennie, we have a couple of minutes now, and then there'll be a virtual room afterwards with some discussion. Drop questions in the chat. But I thought that was really interesting. There's, it's so great to kind of see what all of these events and the pandemic and even, like regular tech conferences have always been a sort of very, very complex interaction of different kind of social pressures and all those kinds of things. So that was great. Thank you very much. I don't see any questions, so it looks like you've achieved complete understanding. And now everybody understands everything. Yeah, so we got thank you, amazing presentation, thanks. So yeah, that was really good stuff. I have just one very quick question. How do you, as somebody with autism, how do you find presenting virtual events like this compared to doing in-person presentations? Because obviously I've seen you present at lots of physical events and now at lots of virtual events as well. How do you find the difference?
I need a lot of time to get over it because it's more difficult. Sorry, but not only because less than time, but also when I was speaking in real life, I really depend on the reactions of the audience. You see people, and you see them, and you don't have it, and that's difficult. So, for example, if you are presenting this talk and the stage on a real live, you see if people accept your joke. So, in this talk, I made a joke about that texting thing. In real life, it's easy. You see, does it work? Does it work? Do I offend people? Virtual is a black box. So no, at this time, I really have to check the Slack, the conference chat. Are people, maybe I open up the other room, of course, for talking. Do people like it or really not? You don't see anything. It's a black box and it's not fun. But you have to do it because the reason I'm still doing it, I really want to still inspire the world, and the world needs to be more accessible for people with autism, but also for other accessible stuff, as you know that I'm doing, Dylan. So that's the reason you do it, but it takes a lot of mind shift, and it's not the same.
We're really
but I
glad
do
you're
it
doing
for my passion and because I find I need to do it.
So we do have, I think we got time just for one more question. Can autistic people work in a big team, e.g. 10 people? Is it more communication? Do you find it overwhelming? What sort of team size do you find comfortable for collaborating with?
So first of all, autism is not always it's always not a one-fits-all approach. So person by person, most of the time it can be more difficult, but difficult isn't the same of impossible. So maybe the most important thing. So if people are working with a big group, you said 10 people. 10 people is important, but all the other 9 people understand the people with autism, but they understand his or her thoughts. The worst thing that can happen that they don't understand each other and that they are saying because he or she doesn't want to do that. It's not because he or she can't do that because they're autistic thinking that they don't want to do it. So what's happening, what's needed there is that the coworkers are thinking about the person autism, explaining explaining how it works, why to do that, giving their boundaries, but also accepting the boundaries about the people with autism. I gave a talk in the past about, at a lot of conferences, about coworkers with autism. I think it's called Help. My coworker is autistic. And I also did a talk about Ignite 2 years ago, last year, about autism. And maybe I want to resubmit it for some conferences because there's really a set of advices to do that. And I also at the DDSoft we do some consulting about that. But it's just very possible, but there has to be willingness from the person with autism, but also from the coworkers. But I really won't say impossible.